let us open our hearts so we can experience your holiness, so that we can walk out our days in your commandments, to be a holy vessel, Lord. And I ask this in Yeshua's name. Amen. For those of you who are wondering why I'm here, and you might not have been here at the beginning of the service, Rabbi decided, life wasn't calm enough, and, we just needed a little more excitement. That's the word, Cheryl, in our life. And he decided to fall down some stairs and bruise his ribs and fracture his scapula. So when you see him this afternoon, do not pet him on his left side, because he's a little sore, and he was told last night that he had to drive this morning, so he couldn't take pain pills. So he's living off of ibuprofen right now until he gets home and can take another pain pill and go to bed. So he just felt like he wasn't going to have the whole full range of motion, and if he coughs or laughs, although Natalie got him really good the other night laughing, everything hurts. So I told him I'll be glad to step in this once. Yes, I see my daughter's going, oh, she got him going too. And he kept going, ow, ow. And then he'd laugh more and go, ow. So anyway, it's never, as I said, I sent an email to our leadership and I went, it's never a dull moment in the Seculo house. So Bobby did an awesome aliyah this morning and just kind of kicked off this whole book of Leviticus that we're going to be starting. And my question to you guys out there is, when you hear the word Leviticus, what does that bring to your mind? Give me some words. What does that bring? Rules? Sacrifices? Levites? Priests? Okay. All right. Well, laws, statutes, sacrifices, but most people, except maybe you guys here, have a mental block when it comes to this book. How many times before you decided to adopt a Messianic faith, you have we're going to read the Bible through a year. So you get started, Genesis is going good, Exodus is going good, and then you get to Leviticus. Let me flip ahead, We'll just skip that book, right? Because it's boring, it's not exciting. We've had this exciting narrative in Genesis and Exodus, and now we get to this. It's like the letdown after a good show, right? Or you go to a show thinking it's going to be really good. We had one the other week we went to, and we actually walked out at intermission. It's not exciting. It's bloody. It's boring. It's difficult to understand. It's not relevant for today. The temple's not there, right? Wrong. So today, I want to start in the very beginning. I want to start at Leviticus 1:1. And it says, Now Adonai called to Moses and spoke to him out of the tent of meeting, saying. Now, did you catch that? For all of you grammar people, and by the way, I'm flipping between translations, so what I say may not necessarily match up there. I got some TLV and I got some Complete Jewish Bibles, so for you grammar people out there, we've got a double verb. We've got called and we've got spoke. Wouldn't just one of them been enough? Well, the answer is that God's call to Moses was something prior to and different from what God went on to say. The latter was in the details. The former was the summons, the mission, not unlike God's call to Moses at the burning bush, where he invited him to undertake this task that would basically define his life, leading the people out of exile and slavery and to the promised land. As I said earlier this morning, it wasn't getting the Jewish people out of Egypt, it was getting Egypt out of the Jewish people, right? That was his thing. He had to get them from being a slave to being a people called of God, priestly nation. So why the second call? Probably because the book of Leviticus, on the face of it, really has nothing to do with Moses. Do you know the original name given to this book by the sages was Torat Kohen, the law of the priest. And Moses wasn't a priest, that was his brother's job, Aaron. So it was as if God was saying to Moses, this too is part of your vocation. You're not a priest, but you're the vehicle through which I reveal my laws, including those of the priest. So Moses' job wasn't done. Now we see that it starts with God calling. And the Bible is full of God calling. It began with God calling Abraham to leave his land and leave his family. And then God called to Moses multiple times. Okay? Then you've got the really touching account of God calling to a young Samuel. Okay? Then we see Yeshua calling his disciples on the shore of the lake. They're all prophetic calls. They were all calls to relationship, to action, to impacting the future. Hearing God's call is what gives life meaning and purpose. And it also means drawing closer to Him. But you know what? I really think that being close to God is something that really eludes us nowadays, because the pace of life is too fast, because we're too materialistic, because we're living in a secular society, because times have changed. It really makes it difficult to draw close to God. We have to be intentional if we're going to draw close to God. But the book of Leviticus takes up this theme of drawing close that the book of Exodus so graphically told us. We had the redemption from Egypt. We had the tabernacle. We had the priesthood. We had the presence of God. All of those we saw in the book of Exodus. But now Leviticus is going to expound on all of that with these intricate laws of sacrifice. Leviticus begins with speaking about a person who wishes to offer an offering to God. And in this sense, it's an animal offering. Something that really, if we read nowadays, only really concerns the time of the temple, right? But as we well know through our study of Torah, that each word of the Torah has several different levels of meaning. So the Hebrew word for offer or offering also means draw near. So through these bloody sacrifices, we're going to draw near to God. So what does this tell us about a person who wants to draw near to God? How do we do that? You draw near to God by offering yourself to God. You have to have self-surrender in order to partake of the sacred moments. So my question is, have you heard of the invitation of God to draw near to Him? You know, that initial call is really the first instance of self-surrender. It requires us surrendering ourselves and accepting and confessing that Yeshua is the only way to salvation. And if you have never answered that initial call, you're going to have an opportunity at the end of the service. Because John 4:16 says, Yeshua says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. As we talked about this morning, there really isn't an Old Testament and a New Testament. It's one book. It's all a continuation. One doesn't end and the next doesn't start. It's all one story, so you can't pick and choose. So Yeshua says in this book of God, I am the only way. So you're not going to get there through good deeds. You're not going to get there by being a good person. You're not going to get there by however you think you can barter with God. The only way you get there is through Messiah Yeshua and through your acceptance of that. Only way. No other way, guys. And it's clear in his book. He said it. I didn't. I'm just repeating it. Okay, so you have that initial call to draw near, to accept your salvation. But is that the only call of your life? No. God continues to call to you to draw near to Him. So my question is, how do you respond? Do you respond with Hineni, here am I, send me? Or do you respond like Jonah and run away and go the opposite direction? Because when God calls you, it's an invitation to seek more of Him. But oftentimes we see it as otherwise. We see it as, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I've got to change. Oh, I've missed the mark. God's offering us a gift, and we see it as an obligation. So God calls us to come closer, to get to know him better. But the question is, how do we do this? James 4:8 says, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. So he's telling us, as believers, to purposefully move into greater intimacy. Think about it. For those of you who are married, you got a husband and wife. They live in the same house, right? But if the husband's in his office on his computer all the time, and the wife is in her craft room or watching TV or whatever, is there really any intimacy going on? Or are they just existing? There's really no close interaction. They're each functioning independent of each other. But James is calling on believers to get into the same room with God. Don't be in another room. You may be in the same house, be in the same room. Get into the same room. Get off the device. Get the earplugs out of your ears. Get in the same room with God. And then have a conversation with him. Talk with him. Hear what he has to say. Isn't that how you grow a relationship, is through communication? Last time I checked, it was. You're not going to know God if you don't have a conversation with him. And that's one reason why a diligent prayer life is so important. But you've got to get to know God deeply. Surface knowledge isn't going to get you through those tough times of life. But getting to know God is going to require you to get outside of yourself, outside of your preconceived notions and attitudes and what you think he should be or should do, etc. Okay? Maybe you had an absent father when you're growing up. So you're projecting those feelings onto God. You're expecting him to leave you when you need him the most. Or maybe you had a harsh father growing up. You could never do anything right. You were always yelled at. So you assume God's going to deal with you harshly. So you want to keep your distance because you don't want to be hurt anymore. Maybe your father didn't leave you, but maybe he didn't live up to his word. Right? So you can't fully trust God's word because your earthly father never kept his word. Again, you're projecting. Maybe there's a failed relationship, a broken engagement that's led you to be distrustful. Your heart's broken, your heart's shattered. Where are you? What's your preconceived ideas? Can you be honest with yourself for a minute, maybe even 30 seconds? But if I ask you, what do you think about God? What's your gut reaction? That first 30 seconds, what is it? Because you know what? That's the most pure reaction you're going to get. That's before all your filters and all the shoulda, coulda, wouldas kicked in. And that's how you really view God. Does he feel distant or does he feel close? Is there a momentarily twinge of fear, or do you feel love? Is there anger? Is there joy? Do you feel inadequate, or do you feel satisfied? How do you, sitting in that chair right there, really feel? Can you be honest enough with yourself to answer that question? Because whatever that initial gut reaction is, that's how you're going to frame your relationship with God. So you need to be very well aware of what that is, so you don't let your human emotions keep you from the relationship with God that he wants to have with you. I think it's safe to say that most of us really desire to have a close walk with God. We want to feel his presence. We don't want to just feel his presence here on Saturdays. I think the last song, all of us felt the presence of God. I could be wrong. I know I did. If you have a pulse, hopefully you did too. But we don't want just that 30-second presence because this great song's going on. We want that throughout the week. It's not a one-time thing. It needs to permeate every part of our life. So how do we do this? How do you approach any relationship that you really want? You know, you're engaged and you really want to know that fiancé well. You know, you're a husband and wife and you're walking on this marriage road, but you really want to get to know each other better. Maybe you've been married a long time, but there's still things you need to talk about in order for the relationship to continue to grow deeper. So the first thing you really have to do is prepare your heart. Because out of your heart is where everything comes out of. So do you really desire to have a relationship with God? And why? Why do you, deep down, hard questions today, want to have a relationship with God? What's your motivation? Is it because it's expected of you? Because your parents are going to be upset if you don't? Is it because this is what your parents told you? Is it because what society says? Is it because you're sitting in here with this room of people and you feel peer pressure if you happen to express a doubt? Why do you want to have a relationship with God? Is it because you think He's going to give you stuff? That's not what His book says. Yeah, He's going to give you stuff, but it's not all good, okay? We're going to have trials and tribulations. Why do you want to have a relationship with God? Okay, many times, because of what we've gone through in life, our hearts are hardened and scarred. And we don't want to open our hearts up. We're really happy in our little box. And that box doesn't include God. It's me, myself, and I. But Psalm 147:3 says, He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. So He's willing to help you if you're willing to let Him. Okay? But we're cynical. We feel unworthy. I'm not good enough. But God can cause our hearts to change. Psalm 51:14 says, Restore to me the joy of your salvation and sustain me with a willing spirit. So if we are willing to open ourselves up, if we're willing to answer the hard questions, He'll restore our hearts. Ezekiel 36:26 says, Moreover, I will give you a new heart. I will put a new spirit within you. I will remove the stony heart from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. But how many times are we not willing to accept that? Because our pride, our hurts, our intellect gets in the way. So you need to make a firm decision to do it and then make the preparations to do it. Psalm 57:8 says, My heart is steadfast, God, steadfast. I will sing and make music. Be steadfast in your resolve. Number 2, you've got to make it a priority. But however, I'm going to contradict myself. God is much too important to be just your first priority. Now here's the trouble with priority lists. And I love priority lists. I will tell you, I talked about lists this morning when we were talking about Passover. I love lists. Okay? Check those lists off. You feel so good, right? But here's the problem with priority lists. They're just lists. And they're lists that causes things to be ranked. And they're all different and distinct. And they're all competing for your time because it's a list and you've got to get the list done, right? But since God is your first priority on that list, it means you've got other priorities, right? You've got to earn a living. You've got to take care of your family. You've got to maintain friendships. In my case, you've got to do laundry because you haven't done it in 2 weeks. So, you've got priorities. Mine is laundry right now. I will admit that. But, because they're all lower than God, they're somehow not about God, right? So, let's be realistic. If God's your first priority on your list, you know what? Maybe He gets 10 to 20 hours a week, if we're being generous, right? But then real life kicks in. Okay, you're back to the grind. You got to get the kids to school. You got to get somebody to a doctor's office in case In my case this week, I got to drive everywhere because hubby can't drive because of pain meds. You know? You're running. Sometimes you run on empty, but you're running, you're busy. And then you get to the end of the week and you're like, oh, God was supposed to be my first priority. Oops. Right? In Matthew 22, the Pharisees asked Yeshua to basically make a priority list. Right? Teacher, they said, what is the greatest commandment in the law? In other words, which one should get the number one priority? I love Yeshua. He gives them the answer that breaks all the rules. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So following God wholeheartedly is supposed to change the way you do everything else. So if you love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, you're going to love Him in the way you serve your family, in the way you build your friendships, in the way you earn your paycheck. It's just going to overflow into your entire life. So God wants to be more than just the top line of your priority list. He wants to be the entire list. Okay? Now, I don't doubt all of us intend to pray, and we intend to serve, and we intend to do the right thing. But most of the times, our intentions never translate into actions because we lose sight of one thing, and that's what Yeshua said in Matthew 6:33. But seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So we can tell that if we live out this verse or not. We can tell what our priorities are by what we do and how we do it. How many of us as parents comes out of our mouth and then you go, wow, I sound like my mother. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's not what you do, but it's how you do it. Okay? All other things that we end up doing honestly is how the enemy uses as an excuse to keep us from letting God be the entire list. We have to seek it. Seek is an action verb. We'll go back to grammar lessons. It means you have to do something. You can't just sit here and expect it to all fall in place. Because if you do, it's never going to get done, right? My laundry isn't going to get done sitting on the floor next to the washing machine. I have to pick it up and put it in the washing machine and put the laundry detergent and turn it on, right? And then you have to put it in the dryer and remember to turn the dryer on, but that's another story for another day, right? You got to do something, okay? You can't just sit there like a blob, okay? But it's part of human nature that we people like to plunge headlong into these huge commitments, sometimes without a whole lot of thought, you know? You've got marriage, bringing a child into the world, you know, volunteering your time somewhere. We plunge just into it, right? And don't really have a problem with it. We schedule it. We get it done. It's on my calendar. I'm going to be here. I'm going to do this. But when it comes to the small sacrifices, you know, spending a mere 5 minutes with the same child that you decided to birth and bring into the world, you know, or that spouse you so wholeheartedly chose to care for and nurture, but now they're getting on your last nerve, right? A world war starts because we're not letting God have the entire list. You know, the same phenomenon can be found in our relationship with God. You know, a lot of us here, we've taken up, we're going to eat kosher. We're going to keep Shabbat. But when we get to these small battles, you know, praying with a little more concentration, making sure I have my Torah club done before Shabbat, and not doing it during Oneg. I'm going to step on some feet on that one. Yes, I see what goes on around here, much more than you know. You know, reaching out to that person in need, why do we seem to lose at those? Why? If we seek to draw close to the godly, to find meaning and depth in all of the mundane activities of life, that's how we bring ourselves close to God. So how do we take these mundane activities of life and infuse them with God awareness? It's kind of like, I'm probably going to butcher this, but it's what I said this morning. If you change the way you look at things, things will change. It's what I closed with. Hopefully I did that right. If you look at the preparation and the consumption of eating your food as that which nourishes this body that God gave us and gives us the strength to live the life He's given us, you're looking at it and it becomes God-infused. If you think of work as providing the resources to help others and educate the children and bring others to know Him, you've infused godly into that. If you're aware and mindful of how your activities can draw you closer to God, then the ordinary ceases to be ordinary, and it becomes part of the holy. And your mindset will begin to change when you see the opportunity to serve God in all you do. God doesn't want to be sequestered to a single part of your life. He wants to be the substance of every part of your life and the logic behind every choice you make. As Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10:31, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Do we think glory of God when we're washing clothes? Not really, I'll be honest with you. I'm willing to admit it here. You know? But everything you do, how is it serving God? Or how is it allowing you to serve God? How are you being a light to somebody by doing this? Live radically for God. Number 3 is take a step in the right direction and keep moving. You know, someone said a 1,000-mile walk begins with a first step. Well, if we never take that step, you never take the journey. So when we think about drawing near to God, sometimes we get these lofty ideals on I'm going to pray 3 hours a day. And then you realize, okay, well, if I pray 3 hours a day, I'm losing 3 hours of sleep, right? We never get started. But drawing near to God isn't meant to be a one-time thing. It's meant to be a process. You know, and sometimes God does suddenly show up, right? But usually, even on those occasions, there means there were some preparations along the way. You know, when Solomon dedicated the temple to God, God showed up in an awesome way, didn't He? There was the cloud of glory that came in, and the anointing was so strong, the priest couldn't even stand up to minister. And that occurred rather suddenly, right? But look at all the preparations that led up to that. All the preparations David did to supply the material, all the work that went into building the temple, the sanctification of the priest in preparation of the dedication, the slaying of the thousands of sacrifices, the worship. It didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened to people who had set their hearts to seek God. It happened to people who were ready to receive. So if you don't take the next step, you're going to be stuck in a rut. And the only difference between a grave and a rut is the length, if you really think about it. I know I've got some looks like, where's she going with this? If you don't move forward in your faith, you're going to die, hence the grave. Okay? So your rut is going to lead you to the grave. Your heart's going to grow cold. You're going to get more distant. You're going to say, oh, why should I do this anyway? Because you're not continually drawing near. You know, God's not going to help you with step 3, 4, and 5 until you take step 1. And if you're asking God to help you with something, remember, He's asking you, well, why haven't you done what I asked you to do in the first place? You know, you might be aiming to do something. Well, if you're aiming to do something, pull the trigger and do it. You know, faith is more than just believing. Faith is more than thinking, talking, having convictions. Faith is action. It's movement. It's activity. It's something you do. It's alive. And the last thing we need to do is maintain the relationship. So when we draw near to God, we need to stay there. And we need to do that by studying His Word. That's where we're going to see the growth in His life. You know, a lot of people have problem with faith because it can't be seen and it can't be touched. You know? And I really think God knew that we were going to need something, so that's why he gave us his word. We can hold it, we can touch it, we can read it. And his words are a roadmap for our relationship with him. You know, you've got to communicate with him through prayer, but you've also got to remember to be still. One-sided conversations are not productive. Anybody who's ever had one knows that, right? Don't talk to sit there to hear your own voice, and don't talk to fill in the gaps because we don't like the quiet. Ever notice how people get real uncomfortable when there's a lag in a conversation or it starts to get quiet, and they'll just babble off at the mouth to fill that because they're uncomfortable with stillness? But the other part of maintaining the relationship is being in fellowship with other believers. God desires that we fellowship together. Acts 2:42 says, "And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship and to the breaking of bread and the prayers." So we see there that nobody had to come to the disciples and the new believers on the day of Shavuot and say, "You need to practice fellowship. You haven't gotten it yet." They didn't just have fellowship, they devoted themselves to it. This means fellowship was a priority, and gathering together was important. They didn't say, "Oh, it's raining, I don't want to get out. Oh, my bed's warm and comfy, I don't want to get out of it." They were there. And not only did they show up on time, they stayed. Now, we got the staying part down around here. The showing up on time, we need a little work with, okay? Okay? And the Ruach HaKodesh came upon them and formed this inner unity, and their natural inclination was to exercise it outwardly. Hebrews 10:24 through 25 says, "And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." So when we avoid other believers and we reject their encouragement, the world's going to influence our beliefs and thoughts more than the Word. Ephesians 3:8 through 11 says, "This favor was given to me, the very least of his Kedoshim, to proclaim to the Gentiles the endless riches of the Messiah, and to bring to light the plan of the mystery, which for ages was hidden in God, who created all things." So the purpose is that through Messiah's community, through congregations, through churches, that the wisdom of God might be known to the world. God's plan is worked out in congregational settings. Now, the one thing is you might want to say that God's plan isn't compared to a solo, but to a symphony. You know, only with the full orchestra playing can you hear the beautiful harmony. Can you feel the magic of the moment? And that's what a congregation is. It's God's orchestra. And in order to fully manifest God, each person not only has to play their part, but they have to play it together. And the instruments are our spiritual gifts and natural abilities. And the indispensable means that we use these to perform fellowship. And we work with each other to accomplish his purpose. And it's only when we work together in this way that it's possible to accomplish God's plan. And that's why fellowship is indispensable. Don't be a lone wolf. Don't be a congregation hopper. Don't be a non-participant. Because congregations need you. You know, I keep it real. Everybody knows that. I don't see Rabbi up here, so he can't grimace at me. But, you know, we've had people come to us, or it comes through the grapevine. "Oh, well, I know more than the rabbi does." Okay, you know what? You might. That's perfectly fine. Because I can tell you, Rabbi Scott doesn't know it all. I don't know it all. But what are you doing with that knowledge then? How are you using that? Are you teaching to others? Or are you just walking around in your self-righteousness? Okay? Knowledge is great. But until you give it out so you can help others grow, doesn't mean anything. Oh, I'm not going to come there. It's the same thing every week. Oh, it's the same music. They never do anything new. Really? I didn't know that's what the congregation was about. It was about the music or the food. I thought it was really coming together to worship God. At least that's what last time I checked. That's my understanding of it. You know, there's never a perfect congregation, and if you think there is, good luck, die, go to heaven, then you're covered, okay? But congregations here on earth ain't going to be perfect. There's always going to be something that you can nitpick about, okay? And probably everybody's going, I wish she'd get done. Yes, Whitley, we need the seatbelt. I got you, love. I see it. For those of you who don't know the inside joke here, Whitley says whenever I get up here, it's going to be a bumpy ride, and you need your seatbelt for the turbulence. There you go. So, wrapping up, because it is late, 1 Corinthians 12 makes it really clear that, go read it, that's your homework. Every single member of the body is necessary for the proper functioning. Okay? And because of the importance of fellowship, no one has the right to amputate themselves from the functioning body of Messiah. I'm sorry if you don't like the cookies today, but that's no reason to get mad and take your toys somewhere else. Okay? You're going to discover your best when you're being challenged by others. Okay? But how do you do it in a congregational setting? Recognize your spiritual gifts. And if you don't know what your spiritual gifts are, what's your natural abilities? And know the needs of your congregation. Feel free to see me afterwards. I'll tell you a lot of them. The first one is we need nursery volunteers. Miss Filiana will be at the back, or Whitley in her place will be at the back with a list saying, please sign up. We need nursery volunteers every week. Because it's not right for one person to be in the same nursery week after week after week and not being upstairs to fellowship. Jewish guilt. Understand it, live it, breathe it. Okay? So when you use your gifts, you're not helping just yourself. You're helping the congregation as a whole to be the most fruitful. And as you work with others, your gifts are going to surface, and you're going to figure them out. But the whole thing, wrapping this up, tying it in a pretty package with a bow on top, is the first thing you've got to do is draw near to God. You've got to have that relationship. And until you have that right relationship, every other relationship on the face of this earth is going to have its issues because you don't have the most important one right. So 2 things. Give God the entire list and get in the same room with Him. That's what you need to do. Thank you very much. I'm done.